Hello, I'm Rachael Phillips. I'm an ordinand, training for ministry at Cranmer Hall in Durham. This project is about raising awareness of mental ill health, especially during lockdown. Welcome to Light in the Darkness. The main focus this week is on post-traumatic stress disorder from the perspective of a veteran. Then we've got a prayer experiment, which is about using our bodies. And this ties in nicely with some of the themes we've been talking about over the last few weeks when we're thinking about treatment of mental illnesses and mindfulness and how we use our bodies and how our minds, bodies and souls are all interconnected. But before we get to that, here's the interview.
We get to turn the tables a little bit today. You've been busy interviewing everybody else, and now I have the privilege of interviewing you. But you've indicated that you're happy to talk about your own experiences of living with PTSD, and very grateful that you're willing to be open about that. And I wonder if you'd like to start off just by telling, as much as you're happy to, the sort of story of what led to that experience of PTSD.
It was 2009. I was in a frontline combat role. I was serving with the Royal Engineers, but my job was as I was working with the local population, so I was out on patrol pretty much every day. And we were coming under sustained attacks every single day, and there was the constant threat every time we walked out of camp of stepping on an IED, roadside bomb, or being rocketed into the camp from afar, and plus rifle attacks from insurgents around and about. So there was that level of fear that was kind of there all the time. But actually, it's been explained to me that it was living in that state of adrenaline, fear, hyper-awareness, hyper-vigilance, that to sustain it over that period of time, over months, just I guess my mind couldn't take it anymore. There was an incident while I was on tour, a 9-month-old baby who was brought to me. The baby had fallen into the river. I was the only female on patrol. I was leading the patrol. I was the only female in the whole base at that time. And when this baby was given to me and put in my arms, up until that point, it was the most horrifying experience, really, of my life. And I think that incident and my inability to help in any way, my inability to fix the problem, to do anything whatsoever, haunted me, and maybe contributed to a sort of unravelling, really. I think also at the time, the British Army wasn't brilliant at what was later called traumatic incident management. So if you had experienced something very traumatic, then in later years that there were people around you who were trained in very basic ways, like of any rank, just to ask a few questions and to follow up. But that wasn't really happening at that time very much. So essentially, when I walked back in to the base after that incident, I can only imagine what I looked like, but ashen, horrified, struggling on a lot of levels. And somebody said, "Are you all right, Mom?" And I said yes. And basically it was left at that. I would wake on a night time crying, having terrible nightmares. I shared sleeping quarters with 3 other people, three sergeants, and none of them really asked or mentioned kind of what I was going through, or sort of probed me on that. And I don't blame them, because they didn't know how to deal with me, I suppose. But not being able to talk about it, and being a leader, being an officer, not being able to sort of really talk to anyone, and then the sort of constant threat to life, too much too much for me. And then I had a really weird sense of fear about coming home. I had fear of leaving like the war zone. I had fear of leaving what had become normal, this very strange environment that I'd come to call home, where I knew who I was, I knew what was expected of me, I knew how to act. I had a job that was identifiable, I had a rank that was identifiable. And the thought of coming home and going back to being, because once my deployment was finished, I would go back to university and I was going back to being a civilian student. I just thought, I can't go home. And I wanted to stay in theatre, I wanted to stay in Afghanistan. And I was terrified at the thought of coming back and just being lost. And I didn't think I'd ever be able to relate to anyone in my family again, or my friends. The things I'd seen and done and been part of, I just thought, how can I ever have a normal conversation or life again there?
And are you happy to say a bit about what did happen when you got home?
I knew I wasn't well. I was stationed at a Royal Engineers base where I was serving. And unfortunately, the Royal Engineers blow stuff up a lot. And so where I was based, the constant sound of detonations going on just outside the camp wire, outside the fence, meant that I would be sort of brought back to the experiences of tour. And there were also exercising troops using rifles, just ordinary on exercise. So there was the people who were practicing detonating bombs, if you like, and there were the other exercising troops. You never really knew what you were going to hear, and it's just the normal part and parcel of living on an army camp normally. But for me, I was on edge. I was in a constant state of fear. Where I was based, my sleeping quarters in the officers' mess were across a main road. It has a bridge over it to get into camp. And from the moment of me leaving the safety of the officers' mess and stepping up onto this metal footbridge, I would start to shake and sweat, and my pulse would race. I would be short of breath, and it was just the fear of the unknown. And knowing that once I was off this bridge and into camp, it felt like there was no escape and no control. And I used to have cuts on the palms of my hands where I would be making fists. I just seemed to live with my fists clenched all the time. My nails would dig into my hands so much that, I mean, it was just intolerable. Like, my life at that time was just in a constant state of stress and fear. Car doors slamming, you know, an office door, somebody dropping something. And then one day I just remember I didn't speak to anyone. I didn't have any friends there. I had cut myself off from my family, from friends. I'd very recently got back from tour, so I should really be, you know, seeing people again, but I just buried myself in work. And I was drinking too much on my own. I was going to sleep at 4 o'clock straight after work and not waking up again for maybe 12, 15 hours. But I was exhausted all the time. It's very tiring having PTSD. And this cloud just descended on me, and I had such frightening, dark thoughts. Guilt. I was absolutely racked with guilt about the death of the baby and other things I thought I could have done something about. I held myself responsible for like every ill in the world, in my world, and I felt that I was responsible and to blame for all of it. And in quite a passive way, in a way I felt I deserved. Like, I wasn't even trying to justify anything. I was just saying, yeah, that's all my fault. And then one day I knew I couldn't go to work, and I called my boss, and I could barely speak. I was physically sick, and said, I can't come in, and I think I need help. The first place I went was to the chapel, and I spoke to a chaplain. I told him everything, he then signposted me on, and in no time at all, I was speaking to the community mental health team. Bounced around lots of different health professionals, and got into the army system of care, and was looked after. Had some treatment. Said that I was okay enough to be for my tour, my contract, if you like, to finish, because I was a reservist at the time, and I said I want to go back to university. I'm fit to go back. I'm fine, and that was the end of that. And I went back to university.
And I imagine that as somebody kind of with military training, used to that environment, somebody I imagine very much used to coping and taking things in your stride, this was quite a kind of challenge to your own self-image, to the way you sort of saw yourself and functioned.
Oh, completely. It fundamentally challenged everything I thought about myself. I would have described myself in my early 20s, and this happened when I was 22, 23, as being mentally very strong, tough, resilient. I can cope, I can do stuff. To find myself reacting the way I did to the same pressures that everyone else around me had experienced, and I thought, well, there's nothing wrong with him. Why has he not got PTSD? Why has that soldier not spoken out because they've got PTSD? They're fine. They were there. They were under attack every day as well. What's wrong with me? And being female as well, there's like, I didn't want to be categorized as being weak, and so I was careful to not cry in front of people. It totally shook my understanding of who I was. However, what a helpfully humbling experience it has been. Like when you hit rock bottom, or you feel you're absolutely on your knees, you think, you've just got to build yourself back up again, in a much humbler, much more sensitive way, realizing, I think it's been helpful reaching the edges of my abilities to cope with things. And I've reached those edges physically before through army training and rugby training, actually. But we can reach our physical limits in other ways. And I have reached my mental limits, my emotional limits for sure. And it's a scary place to get to those limits, but I know where they are. So I was able to go back to university. However, I might have told the army medics that I was all right to be signed off. I mean, I wasn't. I was in a very bad way, and it was kind of an incident at university triggered a very swift decline again. I was doing a degree at Teesside University, which is disaster management, and rather aptly titled for my life at that time. And body bags were mentioned in a lecture, and I fell to pieces. And then eventually the university pastoral care team were able to look after me, and I received some amazing treatment called EMDR, which was very helpful in trying to work on how my brain works cognitively. And I had not been able to process the fearful situations I was in when I slept on tour in Afghanistan. This treatment simulates REM sleep, the way our eyes move, rapid eye movement in our sleep, in our dreams. So this treatment helps you to get back into that stage, and then stimulates you with sounds, video footage, or you talk through experiences and memories whilst you're being REM sleep is being simulated, and then you can the theory is you're better able to process them. I don't know if that's what helped, but I did recover for a while. PTSD is weird. It can come and go. You can feel like you're fixed, and it's very sad when you realise that you weren't, and something else comes along.
So the journey of recovery is very much one of sort of ups and downs, ups and starts.
Yeah, for sure. On the 5th of November in 2015, it all just fell apart, really. I was walking to my local vicar's house. It was at night. I could hear the bangs, but I thought it would be better to leave the house and be in the company of others that night than to be in the house on my own. And that was a massive mistake, because as soon as I left the house, I was just transported back to Afghanistan. I remember walking across the road, and I could hear the rockets banging and exploding over my head and lighting up the park. I could hear gunfire all around me, the crackle of other types of fireworks, like Catherine wheels and other fireworks that crackle more is the exact same sound as gunfire. The fireworks that are big rockets, that the sound of it descending, the whistle of it getting closer and closer, is the whistle of a 107 rocket, which the Taliban used to aim at our camp. And I was back there, and I remember, it's such a horrible memory, but I was on my knees, on my hands and knees next to a wall, and I was just shaking and crying, and I couldn't get up, and I was aware that there were other passers-by and that they could see me, and I could see myself in a way, not like an out-of-body experience as such, but maybe yes, I could see myself and what I felt I must have looked like. I was just so scared, and I couldn't get up to get out of the situation. I felt pinned down on all sides by gunfire, by my situation, by my mind. It was absolutely bloody awful, and I remember feeling so betrayed, because it was my own. I knew that I was more scared in that moment than I'd ever been on tour, when I was actually fearful for my life, but I was more scared by what my brain was doing, and it was conjuring this whole situation up. By the time I got to my vicar's house, I was a complete mess. And I was able to, I didn't even know the guy very well. I'd not been at that church for very long. I'd not been a Christian for very long. People didn't really know me. But he got me inside, and he said, actually, there's somebody here. My daughter's boyfriend was in the army, and he's here right now. Like, would you like to talk to him? And I was physically shaking and just crying. And I said, yeah, I'll speak to this guy. And I thought, like, well, at least we'll be able to just speak to another soldier. Honestly, Colin, that there's nothing that can beat that feeling of camaraderie, and like they know where you've been in more ways than one. And I spoke to this guy, and he listened, and I felt I was able, he understood. He'd been on tour as well. In fact, I think maybe even at the same time as me on one of his tours. And he said, he and his girlfriend said, I think you might need to get some help. And that then got me into a long process of working with the NHS. And in fact, I ended up going to West Park Hospital, where you work. When I arrived at my appointment for West Park, and I must say, you've already touched on sort of self-image and this idea we have of ourselves. I didn't ever think I was a person who would go to West Park Hospital myself, unless I was there to visit somebody. For me to go to a hospital like that, it was very hard to drive there. It's very hard to go to these appointments and to say, like, I am really, really struggling. Very difficult to do.
And imagine the kind of, just that sort of crushing disappointment in a way that, you thought you'd come back to a better place, and here it was happening all over again.
Oh, it was huge disappointment. But anytime I'd had periods of good health, good mental health, I've always convinced myself that this time I'm fixed. I don't believe that I will ever recover 100%. And I'm okay with that, because that is actually helpful for me to know that I need to do things to look after my mental health now. But at the time, I genuinely thought it had gone, and this was just took me straight back.
I wonder what your experience of PTSD does for you now, for the way that you believe and for the importance of faith in your own life?
A big help for me has been the words of Psalm 139. They describe a God who knows me inside out, who has always known me, who has always loved me. Always, even before I knew God, God knew me and loved me. And despite my brokenness, and certainly anything I may be responsible for, that I carried around with me, that any guilt or shame or self-perception, God had it all. God had me, held me, cared for me, loved me, comforted me through the words of the Bible, through scripture, comforted me through the community, through the Christian community, comforted me through the church. Where I used to clench my fists, I can hold this now, and I can hold this tight as hard as I can, and it won't break. And I can feel the smooth wood and trace, as I do, I trace a cross on it. And that's like a grounding technique for me, something I actually have been taught. They didn't teach me that because they're a bit perplexed by my faith. Actually, the NHS counsellors I've had have never really known what to do when I say that. It'd be great to have more of a conversation about how worlds can collide. But they taught me techniques to kind of touch my shoulders or touch my hands as a grounding technique, touch my fingertips. I would do that to remind my body that I am in the world and that I'm not where my mind is trying to take me. That's what does that for me now, is my holding cross. And this particular cross has been all over with me, all over the world with me. My Bible as well. This Bible was given to me the day I became a Christian in Afghanistan. My second tour I became a Christian, so good things happened in Afghanistan too. Having this physical Bible, taking it, these are genuine things that have helped me. So what's inside the Bible, but also the symbol of the Bible, the physical cross, but what the cross represents, the Christian community, Jesus' hands and feet, but in community. All these things have helped me and made me realize that I can pray, I can ask for help. Help is always there. Jesus walks with me. Jesus has suffered. Jesus knows suffering. And that my hope and my identity is not wrapped up in my former identity of a soldier. My identity is not in Afghanistan. My identity is not someone who is broken, who has PTSD. I am not known for having depression. My identity is in Jesus, and that has helped me rebuild periods of my life.
You've mentioned people who have been really helpful to you on that journey, and no doubt there would have been people perhaps who have been less helpful as well. And I know that people often worry that they'll say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing if they're sort of trying to support somebody who's living with a condition such as this. I wonder what you would say to those people. What is most helpful about other people's responses to you, and perhaps one or two of things that perhaps aren't so helpful?
That's a good question, because I didn't used to tell people about this. Me speaking out about this is a relatively new thing. I didn't want to tell people because I didn't want to be known for this. I wanted to be known for positive things. I wasn't ashamed of it. It's not quite that. I wasn't embarrassed about it. I just didn't want people to think they were walking on eggshells. Whereas if I put all my energies into this facade of coping and being fine and being all right, then people would just act normally around me. But actually, when I have had a massive meltdown and people haven't known, then it's just been so much harder for everyone involved, including me. But when I started to come out about it and tell people, first of all, my rugby family, telling my teammates meant that when it got to that time of year, around bonfire night and being out on the big open pitches in the dark and fireworks being let off, they knew that I would be fragile to that, and they could help me, and they have helped me so much. And they really, really are so grateful that I have shared my mental ill health problems, because then they can I remember one of the girls just getting me by the shoulders and saying, "You're all right, Rach, you're all right, you're here." So that was helpful. But when people don't know, then they don't know why you're acting strange, why you can't breathe, why you can't join in. It's awkward things have happened out in town, in pubs, where someone's dropped a glass and I've been straight on the floor. Literally, my reactions are so good. I'm the first person on the floor. But when people don't know, then they just laugh, because they don't know. Like, they're not laughing at me. But no. I just want to say, I'm a soldier. I was a soldier, and I just want to tell people that. And I know they'd stop laughing, and they'd be, really embarrassed. And I wouldn't want them to be embarrassed. But by sharing it, by telling people, my new work colleagues, when I started working for Durham Diocese, and I had to say, because I was really, really struggling at that time, that I would feel very uncomfortable every Friday during the fire drill. When the alarms start going off for fire practice, as they did, I would be very uncomfortable with that. And so I couldn't avoid it, but at least everybody in my office knew, and would be aware that I'd be holding my desk, or I would, have my hands over my ears, or doing something to take my mind off it. So I was prepared for it. I always knew that it was going to come around. Unhelpful comments. Yeah, quite recently, actually, I had a very unpleasant reaction, PTSD wise, while seeing my dentist. And she then referred back to it at my next appointment as being a funny little incident. She said, "Oh yeah, we'll look after you today because you went a bit funny last time. You had a funny incident." And I had explained quite clearly what my problem was, and she just didn't have the vocabulary or the language to know. And she was probably a bit embarrassed, and maybe wasn't used to dealing with it. So, but I was quite offended by her language. To call what I've been through as a funny little incident, or how I was in the dentist chair that day, was quite, it sort of undermined the struggles that I go through every time I try and see the dentist, and the courage it takes me to go to the dentist now, because of all of this. So people can be a bit unhelpful, but also I need to have bags of grace, and just be the best.
Yeah, but what really comes over there is, Rachael, is actually, on balance, the benefit for somebody struggling with something like this in being able to find people that you can tell and who can almost like walk with you on that and share that.
Only good things have come from me sharing my story. Only good things. Yeah. The first time I was asked to share my story was from a member of the Armed Forces Christian Union, or in fact, she, I think, was running it at the time, and she asked me to write an article to help other soldiers who were suffering from PTSD or similar problems. And I didn't want to at first, because I didn't want to vulnerably share the hardest parts of my life. Especially, I'd spent so many years building up this idea that I was fine and putting in so much energy to this facade, and then to actually say that, I mean, it's not that it's been a lie, it's also not quite the truth. But then my husband convinced me that if just one soldier read my article and went and got help, because she or he recognized themselves in what I wrote, then it's worth it. And it was. And so you've not been able to shut me up since.
And that's absolutely great. I mean, you talked a bit, Rachael, about, you sort of implied that you kind of had to learn to look after yourself. And I wonder what your kind of top tips are with that. Obviously, under COVID, for many of us, our mental health has been under pressure. What have you learned about looking after yourself through?
For me particularly, it's managing stress, because when I am overwhelmed by things I can't control, stresses in my life, then it chips away at my ability to keep everything else at bay mentally. So I am pretty good at dealing with stress. It's just there's a limit. We all have our limits. And when I can see that there's too much stress and I feel like I'm losing control, that's when I know that I'm more likely to sort of regress, if you like. If I was in that situation where I felt like my mental health was not great, then something like a car door slamming is likely to really significantly and severely bother me again. Whereas when I'm mentally healthy, I don't even hear it anymore. I mean, cars backfire, but I'm not on the floor. So for me, it's managing stress and making sure that I have a good balance in my life. It's not always easy to do, especially right now. Like I'm obviously training for ordained ministry. I'm split between university and the parish. We're in the middle of a pandemic. There are lots and lots of stresses in my life right now. And so I've just recently had to share that and say, oh, I think it's a bit too stressful. Can any of this be taken off my plate? And that's how I think I'll have to be. I think maybe we could all do with being a bit more like that.
Well, I think you might be right there, because a lot of us, we have a tendency to take on more and more and have an expectation of ourselves sometimes that we should just be able to take all of that. So I think that's very wise, Rachel, actually, that that it's okay to say, hang on, I think I'm at my limit of things here at the moment. I need to perhaps lose some stuff.
Yeah, well, this whole process has challenged this idea of self and who I am. And so I don't try and be that strong person who can take on everything. I mean, to be fair, a lot of my friends would probably say that's a load of rubbish. Yes, you do still do that. I'm aware that I don't always practice what I preach. But in all honesty, I know my limits. I know I have been brought to a position of total dependency and weakness through this experience that's been going on now 12, 13 years. And it helps me to say, I can't, whereas the old me would have always said, yes, I can, give me more. So it's saying, I recognize my limits. And I think people listen. When I do say I've reached my limits now, I think people around me are pretty quick to listen and say, okay, right, how can we help? Because people around me know. But if they didn't know, then they wouldn't be able to help. So it's just, I can't say it enough. Tell people, speak out, share it, tell people.
And from what you say there, Rachel, and this might be too strong a word to use, so I'm not trying to put this in your mouth, but there's almost, coming over in what you say, a kind of sense of there having been some gift in what you've been through, in terms of how it's shaped you as a person, how it's taught you to cope with the demands of life, perhaps how it's kind of shaped the way you see your future ministry. Is that too strong a word to use?
No, I'd use that word. I definitely. I mean, it's a funny kind of gift, not one I'd want to give anyone else, but I've been given it. Yeah, I'm glad I've been through what I've been through, because it's shaped who I am. I mean, I wouldn't want to go through it again, but I have, and it is what it is, and it's made me aware of the mental health systems. I feel I'd be better able at signposting other people on. I think I can almost recognize some of these things in other people. Certainly depression, which I was also diagnosed with around that time, and just the empathy and my expectation of myself and my expectation of others, and just being gentle with myself, being gentle with others. In future ministry, I hope that God has in store for me, leading a church that is open and welcoming to people for whoever they are, however they are created, with all their flaws, with all their foibles and difficulties and the mess of life. We've got to bring the mess of life to church, to be authentically who we are, not to hide, not to pretend, because God knows it all anyway. We're just scared of doing it in front of each other. So yeah, I think it'll help me in my future ministry.
So I wonder, how much do you think about what you do with your body when you pray? Scientists are continually finding more connections between our bodies and our minds. We're not just a mind in a body, like a computer in a case. Our bodies are part of us. And what we do with our bodies can actually shape our thinking. If you don't believe me, try this. Smile. You actually feel happier when you make the muscle movements that form a smile, even if you're only acting. This is truly backed up by science. We don't tend to think much about what we do with our bodies when we're praying. Though you might well remember being told as a child to pray hands together, eyes closed. The idea of that was simply to stop you being distracted. So prayer positions. How many different physical ways of praying can you think of? Originally, in Roman times, people seem to have stood to pray with their arms outstretched. In many churches, the posture of the priest during the communion prayer is a descendant of this. Kneeling became fashionable in the Middle Ages. It was a position that people were used to because you knelt before your Lord or the King. Kneeling was used because as people began to develop a more personal idea of God, they related to God as they would do to their social superior. A similar theme can be seen in other cultures. Muslims, for example, bow and kneel and then bow their heads to the ground in prayer, which again imitates the kind of posture used in the presence of a king or superior in Eastern medieval culture. In some times and places, people lie face down on the floor to pray. This is called prostration, and it's usually kept for particularly serious times of prayer. In the past, monks or nuns might pray all night, laying on the floor, before taking vows to join a monastery, and a knight might do the same before a battle. In some churches today, the posture is used on Good Friday, or at the ordination of new clergy. Nowadays, the most common posture for prayer is sitting down. Differences are mostly about what you do with your hands. Are they to be clasped together? Maybe flat together? Or open on your knees as if you're waiting to receive something from God? Some people pray with their hands in the air, as if being carried away at a rock concert or celebrating a goal. Now for the prayer experiment itself. Firstly, find somewhere you know you won't be disturbed, so you don't feel embarrassed at being found in a variety of strange positions. I appreciate this is not necessarily that easy during lockdown. Then try standing with your arms out, like a priest at the altar. Imagine you're standing before God. How does it make you feel to be in front of God like this? Next, kneel down, either on one knee or both knees. Imagine you are kneeling in front of God. How does it make you feel? For the third posture, try lying down, flat on your front, legs together, arms outstretched, a bit like a lying down crucifix. Are you lying in front of God? How does that feel? Or are you imagining what it was like to be Christ on the cross? Next, sit down on a chair. Imagine Jesus pulling up a chair and sitting next to you. How does it feel to be talking to God in this position? Try some different positions for your hands too. Remember, this prayer experiment is about helping you to connect better with God. It doesn't matter to God how you pray, whether it's lying on your front or sitting down in a chair, because God will hear you anyway. This experiment is just about thinking about praying differently and trying something new.
A prayer for reassurance. Gracious God, you look with compassion upon us when we are worn down by anxiety. unable to find our way through the fears that hold us captive. We may have lost our compass, and how to find our direction once again seems impossible. We long to steer for home, but we are battling against an outgoing tide in our small boats, and there is no one who can bring us safely to shore. The waves rise, and our fears rise with them. But even as we cry out to you for help amid the dark skies and the stormy seas, remind us, Father, that we are not alone. You are with us as we pass through the waters, and you will not let our boats be overwhelmed. Your hand is upon the tiller, and the beacons are lit on shore, guiding us home. Give us the wisdom to know that we can trust you and hold on to you in these times of stress and fear, for you will bring us home. You know each one of us by name. We are loved and are precious in your sight. Thank you, Father, for holding us in the hollow of your hand. In Jesus' name. Amen.
If anything in this episode has unsettled you and you want to speak to someone, then please don't hesitate to reach out. There's information at the end of the video of some organisations ready and waiting to support you. And each Thursday in Lent, I'll be hosting a drop-in session on Zoom, and I'd like to warmly welcome you to come along. Whether you just need a bit of contact, you want to talk about anything from this episode, or even explore your faith and what God might be saying to you at this time, please feel welcome. Details of how to join the Zoom room are on our website. And if Zoom isn't your thing, then Jen, our lovely vicar, is at the end of the phone and happy to talk. We also have a dedicated pastoral care team of wonderful volunteers. More details can be found on our website.